Hello and welcome to Snarky Wine's Video Tasting Notes. I'm Kevin Gagnon, a Valpolicella wine specialist and wine journalist living in Germany. Today we have a special opportunity. We have a mini vertical tasting of an Amarone from the producer named Novaia. Corte Vaona, we have three vintages today, 2015, 2008 and 2004. Novaia is a relatively small family estate in the heart of the Classico region of Valpolicella. With just 7 hectares of vines in the Marano valley, we are working with mostly clay soils and some volcanic soils, tough. The vineyard has been certified organic since 2015, our last and youngest vintage for this wine. The three vintages are also quite different. 2015 was a very hot vintage that actually produced a lot of very high quality fruit. So they had really high yields in the vineyards, up to 3 times as much as in previous vintages. But as I mentioned, hot. So the danger was of really overripe quality in the grapes. Novaia tends to favor a lighter, fresher, more elegant style of wine. So they also harvest the grapes a little bit earlier than a lot of other estates do in order to maintain that acidic balance. 2008 was considered a classic vintage, a little bit cooler than 2015 by comparison, and actually very similar to the vintage 2016. So a little more freshness in the resulting wines. 2004 was cooler again. That is considered a cool vintage in the region. So we have more acidity and a little bit less focus on the very, very ripe fruit. Fascinating collection of wines for today's tasting. Now let's have a quick look at the composition and vinification of these wines. All three of these vintages use the same balance of grapes. We have 50% Corvina, 30% Corvinone, 15% Rondinella, and 5% Osaleta. The first time Osaleta was used for this wine at this estate was in the 2004 vintage right here. So I'm very happy to have the opportunity to try the first vintage that used my favorite grape from the region. After they are picked, the grapes are dried for 3 to 4 months, and then they are destemmed, lightly crushed, and then macerated and fermented over the course of 30 days in small steel containers before they are aged for 24 months in barrel, followed by 8 months in bottle and then released. Now, of course, all these wines have been released. The 2015 is the youngest vintage here today, but it's been on the market already for a little while. So let's get on with the tasting of these wines. We're going to do this in the traditional manner for a vertical tasting of wines, starting with the youngest vintage and moving to the oldest vintage. So our first wine is the 2015. Very young, recently released, and it has a wonderful deep ruby color. There's lots of fruit in the nose. Black cherry, sour cherry, blackberry, strawberry, but there's also something that's really typical for Novaia's Amarone that has a really nice herbal character that you get all through the middle and towards the back of the nose. In this case, rosemary, some sage, and there's a lovely sense of salt as well. Also a little bit of black coffee and some nutmeg and even a hint of cloves. And there's a nuance of leafiness which will develop over time. Delightfully fresh on the palate, really good acidity. And again, so really sour cherry, more black cherry, and other red fruits, a hint of cranberry and strawberry as well. And again, a nice sense of sage and a deliciously salty finish. The finish is also very long. A great balance overall. More black coffee, more nutmeg. This is an excellent quality Amarone, not overbearingly fruity, not jammy at all the freshness that you need to put it at table with food. And that is the goal of the estate. They want these wines to be, never to be heavy, but to be lighter on the palate and fresher despite the alcohol. Now it has to be said, all three of these wines come in at about 15% alcohol. For an Amarone, that's already fairly low. They go to 16, 16.5, I've seen even 17.5% alcohol in Amarone. To keep it at 15% shows the focus on the freshness and the lightness of these wines. And this wine can carry that 15% without any trouble whatsoever. Excellent quality and a delicious wine to drink now, but also something that is going to reward some time in the cellar. Let's move on to the second wine, 2008. It's a little bit darker than the 2015, which is interesting. Possibly because of the different climate conditions. Maybe it's simply a little bit more saleta in the blend. We don't really know, but it's a little bit darker, still starting to move towards garnet from the ruby red. That's not a surprise, not with these grapes, and certainly not with a bit of bottle age. Now what we've got in the nose is quite different than 2015. Lots of cracked black pepper, which is something we often associated with Corte Vaona. Corte Vaona, of course, makes 30% of this blend, and the estate, and the man currently running the estate, the son of Gianpaolo, is Marcello. He loves Corte Vaona. And so they're planting a lot more of it. We can expect to see more Corte Vaona in the wines from Novaia. They believe in the potential of the grape, so do I. It's a really great variety. And what we've got from this cracked black pepper is a more spicy quality in the wine. Still plenty of fruit though. Sour cherry, mulberry, but we also have a little bit more sage and actually moving already towards sort of garrigue herbs like we would get in the southern Rhone. Again, rosemary, thyme, and a really nice fresh orange peel aspect to the wine as well. Tobacco leaf and a hint of smoke in the background. Really balanced on the palate. Nice and smooth. Good grip in the tannin, but they're very, very fine. Also really nice and ripe. No problem whatsoever. Lovely integrated fruit flavors, but the fruit is not the main aspect of this wine. We get more of the spiciness, more of the herbal quality, which is really delicious, great for food, and that wonderful smoky aspect, particularly when you breathe out after swallowing this wine. Great balance overall and nice length. Great wine. Now let's move on to our third wine, the last wine, 2004. Here we've got, as I mentioned, a cooler vintage. Again, the color slightly darker even than the 2008. This is a very interesting progression. The lightest wine was the youngest and the oldest wine is the darkest. Again, like the 2008, moving towards garnet, but there's optically very little difference from the color itself. In the nose, we have a lot more development, which is to be expected. It's got plenty of dried herbs. Sage and rosemary, again, some thyme, but there is still some primary fruit. We've got strawberry, mulberry is there, and we also have that nice floral aspect, violets in this case, and some black peppercorns. Not the cracked black pepper that we had with 2008, but more the whole peppercorns in this case. Lots of tobacco leaf. There is a bit of smoke, but not as much as in the 2008, and we've got more black tea and cocoa and a hint of clove also at the end. Now we're also getting some of the dried fruit character, some dried strawberries, dried cranberries, and a little bit of black truffle again, and some sous-bois. The palate is fascinating. Surprisingly juicy. In fact, it's really young on the palate by comparison. The nose shows more of the development, and the palate is showing lots of young red fruit. We've got strawberry and red cherry, red plum, loads of salt in the finish. Fresh herbs, sage and rosemary, again, thyme. There is also the tobacco leaf, more black tea and cocoa and some clove. And then just at the end of the very long finish, we get the dried fruit aspect. Again, dried strawberries, dried cranberries, and a bit of black truffle and some dried peel as well. But it remains juicy all the way out, which is a great surprise. That's a sign of that cool vintage, that 2004. The freshness really is great. That contributes to this juicy aspect on the palate. It actually has more fruit in the palate than it does in the nose, and works on me as if it was a younger vintage than the 2008, which is obviously 4 years older. This is a much more developed in the nose, but much younger on the palate. This is a really interesting, very complex wine. Plenty of fruit, plenty of herbs, a little bit less spice. Excellent. All three, what a wonderful way to look at these vintages and to try the development of an Amarone over the space of 16 years. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it.